whose talk is called Sentience, How to Recognize and Demonstrate the Ability to Feel. So I've known Manu for, I guess, over 4 years now, and we've worked a lot together. Manu is an associate of OPIS and has been a big supporter of OPIS since the beginning. And more recently, he founded another association called Sentience Research, which focuses more, let's say, on the theory of sentience, and does research on this aimed at a better world, and particularly on reducing involuntary and useless suffering. So Manu, by training and professionally, is a computer engineer and programmer, and he's created artificial life simulations, genetic algorithms, including, or in addition, evolutionary algorithms, and he's authored, I guess, over 100 essays, and he's written 2 books, originally written in Spanish, dealing mainly with the subject of sentience in animals and machines. And he's also written on topics like evolution, cooperation, intelligence, death, ethics, and other themes. So looking forward to hearing your talk, Manu. Please take the Zoom floor. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan, for your kind presentation. Thank you very much, Dean and Alisa, for arranging everything, for arrange this event to share about this important concept of anti-speciesism that is worth to spread the word. So thank you very much for arranging this, very, very necessary. Okay, yes, I'm going to start about sentience. I'm going to talk about how to recognize and demonstrate the ability to feel. I'm going to start with definition. That is, you are going to see that it's not very easy to have a definition. There is a definition that I use that is focused on the ability, the capacity or having positive or negative experiences, such pleasure and pain. This is my own definition, and it's more or less the definition that we use in the Sentience Research team. But it's a polysemic word. In some sense, sentience, sometimes it's used the word consciousness instead of sentience, meaning the same thing. But we focus on sentience because we think, at least I think, that sentience is what is morally relevant, because consciousness that could be a higher concept could include other type of experiences that are not positive nor negative, that are just neutral or indifferent. And I think morally this is relevant because if the experience by itself, if the experience is neutral, is indifferent for that being, well, it's indifferent if that being has the experience or not. Probably, or maybe that experience again has another consequences, and those consequences are relevant, probably. But the experience by itself, if it's neutral, well, it's neutral. It's indifferent for that being. And this is also more or less the definition that Magnus Binding, a philosopher and researcher, is using. We interview Magnus in our website, and he more or less used the same definition. But also Magnus point out, this is graphically represent, also Magnus point out that consciousness is always used, the word, in the sense of self-awareness. So in this sense, sentience and consciousness will be arranged like this, 2 circles. And to make the issue more complicated, even more complicated, a lot of people call sentience to all kinds of experiences, not only positive or negative, like pain and pleasure. So, well, there is an interesting discussion about these concepts, and you can find a discussion like this one. What if the pig does not have a model of itself? So if we use the word consciousness as having a self model, some people think that pig does not have a self model, or if a pig has a self model, let's talk about a snail. Let's assume that a snail does not have a model of itself or himself. Okay, then literally you could say something like the pig or the snail or the human embryo or whatever, no? or a human with cognitive impairment, for instance, if a being does not have a self-model but suffers because it kills. So some people say, okay, that being is not suffering because that being does not exist, at least for itself does not exist, because he or she does not have a model of itself. So it's tricky. So in some sense, it's literally true that that being does not exist, at least for itself, if he or she or it does not have a model of itself. But if there is pain, if there is suffering, that pain or suffering has moral relevance by itself. So it's tricky if that animal or being is being killed and there is suffering there, this suffering has moral relevance. Okay. And okay, so I have introduced these concepts: sentience as positive experiences, subjectivity or subjective experiences that some people call consciousness, but consciousness is also used to mean self-awareness. So, okay, let's use consciousness as self-awareness, and we have these possibilities. I'm going to start with an example. I think it's going to be more clear. I'm going to start here in the top of the left. I see a rock, okay? I see a rock. This is a subjective experience. Let's assume that this experience is not negative nor positive. It's just neutral. It's indifferent. Just I see a rock, okay? But it can also happen this. The rock has sharp edges, and after touching it, I saw that I had a cut, but I haven't even noticed the pain because the pain is so small that I didn't even notice the pain. So I'm in this area now, so I'm having a negative experience, but I'm not aware of the experience. I'm not conscious about that experience. On the other side, let's imagine that the rock has fallen on my arm and it hurts. And maybe I have a broken bone and I have to go to see the doctor. So I'm completely conscious of what's happening, and I have a negative experience, and also I'm conscious of that. And also other possibility, I see a rock and I think about myself seeing a rock. So I'm being aware, I am being conscious in the meaning of self-awareness, but I'm not feeling pain nor pleasure. It's just neutral experience, but I'm aware. And I can also be aware, just purely aware. It's like I am aware that I exist. Okay, so I'm being conscious in the sense of self-awareness, but I'm not having in this interpretation, I'm not having a subjective experience, far more than being aware. And of course, it also is the rock. The rock is over there. Okay, so this is another possibility. Look, some people think that if we have positive and negative experience, those experiences create always a consciousness of them. So if an animal suffers pain or experience pleasure, then it has to be conscious in the sense of self-awareness. This is a possibility, an interpretation of the concepts. And another possibility is that every experience that I have is consciousness, is conscious. It's another interpretation or another view of these concepts. Okay, and to summarize, and I fear this is a mess, this is what it is, I call sentience, me up to now, having positive and negative experiences. Okay, and when I talk about subjectivity or sometimes consciousness, I mean all types of experiences, including neutral experiences. And for talking about self-awareness, I used to use self-awareness word or self-consciousness. And many animal advocates, as me, use the concept of sentience and use consciousness for everything else. It's very close than the use that I have. But a lot of researchers use the word sentience, as I said before, for all types of subjective experiences, not only pain and pleasure, but also neutral experiences, like to see a color and to have an idea of where you are, this kind of experiences. And they use consciousness for self-awareness. And also, most people, a lot of people and researchers use just consciousness. They don't use sentience. Sentience is a word very popular in animal advocacy. And I like it. I think it's a good idea to have this word. Okay. So let's continue. Sentience, where it comes from? Well, there are many theories about reality in general and about sentience in particular. This is a list and structured in 4 big groups. And probably the most popular are religions. And religions explain sentience because according to religions, humans and animals have been created by God. So where it comes from, sentience? It comes from God, according to several religions. And another concept, another paradigm that is in this quadrant, first quadrant, is anthropocentrism, that in my point of view is very similar than the previous one. Is in the God quadrant because it's like considering humans as gods. These two paradigms are very, very popular nowadays. On the other hand, the most recognized in scientific environments are, for instance, the idea that sentience is very linked to biology as we know it, as in general David Pearce defends. Although maybe David Pearce is also considering other possibilities, David Pearce focuses a lot on his concern is about animals, because he thinks that the beings that are sentient or conscious are basically biological animals. But also other researchers like Brian Tomasic disagree. And Brian Tomasic, for instance, consider animals, of course, he considered insects particularly, sentient and very relevant individuals. But also, Brian considers that sentience more or less emerges from the function. Brian Tomasic, in my opinion, is a functionalist and also an eliminativist. Anyway, more or less, Brian considers that sentience is a consequence of something logical or some properties of a substrate. So in this sense, if Brian Tomasic and other people is right, we should move, or we should consider not only anti-speciesism, but also anti-substratism. So anti-substratism is the idea that if they exist, if there are some beings that are able to feel pain and pleasure, but they are made of another type of substrate that is not biological, wet, carbon-based natural neurons, but maybe artificial neurons made of sand, plastic, and metal instead of biological neurons, or maybe artificial simulation or robots. If they feel pain and pleasure, then we should consider morally. This is the idea of anti-substratism. The point is that we don't know if they feel or not. We are going to go deeper into this, but if they feel, they should be considered morally. This is the idea of anti-substratism. Okay, and another very popular paradigm or approach to the problem of sentience is what I call evolutionary emergentist paradigm. That is more or less this combination of ideas. First, what is matter, or what is something physical. It's not exactly the same to be matter, to be physical. David Pearce is researching into this as well, and very interesting research. Anyway, this paradigm says world is matter and sentience created by the combination of neurons in brains, in central nervous systems, where sentience do emerge, okay? And why do sentience emerge? Because as a result of evolutionary process, because according to this paradigm, sentience is useful, at least evolutionarily useful. And the two main disagreements of this framework, in my opinion, are, okay, could sentience also emerge from a non-natural substrate, from an artificial substrate like a computer environment or the circuits of a robot? Can sentience emerge also on with artificial neurons or artificial substrates? Why or why not? And the other main disagreement in this view, in my opinion, is a very interesting subject: is sentience useful by itself, or is just a consequence of how evolution has managed to create beings that are able to reproduce and reproduce like replicators? That's what we are. We are replicators. So maybe evolution has followed one path, but are another paths that can be followed. This is a very interesting question to research. Okay, and this is the main disagreement, as I say, if robots and computer simulations or routines can suffer or not. And well, I also try to fill some gaps in this map of theories, approaches, paradigms related to consciousness and sentience. And well, we don't have so much time, so I will go forward. Okay, let's go to the next part. How to recognize sentience? Well, Animal Ethics, that is an organization with which I used to collaborate from time to time. Animal Ethics has shows three general criteria for deciding if a being is sentient or not, that are physiological, behavioral, and evolutionary. And I have more or less the same. I use more or less the same criteria. I have more or less the same suggestion about how to recognize sentience. That is more or less following these steps. I do feel. I'm completely sure that I do feel. Therefore, if something has similar external appearance and internal constitution, and or has similar behavior, for instance, it cries, but not only it cries when it's hit with a stick, and it cries in the same context in which I will cry. So it's like me, it's crying. So similar external and internal appearance, physical, behavior, and evolutionary similarities, similar origin. If we believe that we are created by evolution, then some beings, some species are closer than others to us or to me. So if this being has similar genetics than me, I have more confidence of its sentience. And I add another one here, that is if that being has similar typical intelligence. That could be useful. We will see very soon. So if this happens, probably it feels. So in summary, we are going to check physical resemblance, similar behavior, evolutionary proximity, and that's an interesting thing. Let's imagine that we meet an intelligent, very smart alien. Will we think that he is, or she, or it is sentient? I think probably yes. Probably we think that probably it's sentient. And why? Because sentience seems to be something useful evolutionarily, to make decisions, for instance, like a motivation to make the best decisions. And we link this ability and intelligence all together. And if we find something or someone that is intelligent like us, even if it's not very similar, probably we will think that it is sentient. And this is the example of the octopus, because the octopuses are not very similar than us, are different, has a lot of legs. Octopuses are more or less farther than other species in the evolutionary, in the tree of evolution. They are far, and the behavior is strange for us, but octopuses are very smart. So these are criteria. I'm not very happy with this criteria, but I think it's interesting to consider this criteria as well, that if something is intelligence, maybe as evolution has identified or has evolution has select intelligence or other abilities, has select sentience for that being. More or less, this is the reasoning. Okay, but is this a valid type of evidence? Because we are recognizing sentience in other beings through resemblance to closeness to ourselves. Is this valid? A valid type of evidence? Well, let's summarize again. If it looks like me, it will feel as I do. If it behaves like me, it would feel as I do. If it has been created like me by evolution, it will feel as I do. And if it's smart as me, it will feel as I do. Okay, but this way of detecting sentience has a problem. That is the streetlight effect. Streetlight effect, this is the story of a man that was in the street at night, and he has lost the keys. So he cannot enter his house because he has lost the keys. And it's very dark, it's at night, it's very dark. So where does he look for the keys to enter into his house? He looked for the keys under the streetlight. Why? Not because under the streetlight is the more probably place where the keys are. It's because under the streetlight is the most probably place where he can find the keys. Because in other places, he cannot see, he's blind. And this metaphor is very appropriate for this method to recognize sentience, because we are recognizing sentience for similarity to myself. And this is not fair for other beings that are very different from us. For instance, let's think about an ant, an insect, that is thinking about these things. And for an ant, maybe an aphid or another insect is sentient because an aphid is very similar to an ant. But we, humans, for an ant, maybe we can maybe be considered as phenomenons, we and elephants, because we are so big. We are very big for an ant. So maybe we are too much big, and we are not considered sentient for the ants. This is, I think, this is very interesting because this method is unfair for beings that are very different from us because the streetlight effect. And well, this is a valid type of evidence. It is. I have put here in this slide several types of methods to obtain knowledge, from the best to the worst, or from the worst to the best. For instance, having a dream or a revelation or superstition, they are not very good methods to obtain knowledge. This is why they are very unscientific, because they are bad. This is why they are unscientific. If they're good, they're scientific. Scientific means good in this context. For instance, intuition is better than a revelation or a dream, because intuition could be a reasoning difficult to explain. So we have the knowledge, but we are not able to explain it. So intuition is better. Reference is not bad. It's what someone say, but anyway, what someone say can say nonsense. So reference is, well, not so bad, but it's not so good. What is better? Authority, prestigious sources, etc., etc. So this method that we are using now of similarity remains interpolation and extrapolation, and is considered reasoning by analogy, a type of inductive reasoning. Okay, so it's a valid method. It's not the best, but it's a good one. And I'm going to give another example to show how can this method be used. For instance, imagine we're traveling in our spaceship across the galaxy, wow, and then we find a planet, a beautiful planet, and wow, as soon as we discover new characteristics of this planet, every characteristic is the same that our planet Earth. Wow, incredible. So it's at the same distance from the moon, it's from the same size, from the same relative size to the moon, and the same distance to the sun, and have an atmosphere, etc., etc. Everything is the same that planet Earth. Okay, in this case, when we find another characteristic of this planet, we give a higher probability, a much higher, that it will be again the same that planet Earth, but a lot of characteristic has coincided. So the next one probably it is the same that planet Earth. Maybe yes, maybe not, but the probability is higher. This is reasoning by analogy, another case. And there's another approach of this problem. This type of reasoning could be also considered abductive reasoning. That is the method that used our friend Sherlock Holmes. I'm here. In inductive reasoning, we start from specific observation and we reach a general conclusion. And in deductive reasoning, that is more or less the opposite, we start from a general rule and we reach a specific conclusion. Okay? And abductive reasoning is more or less a mix in which we have incomplete observations, but we try to get the best prediction in the Sherlock Holmes. So in our context of sentience, one example of abductive reasoning will be, as we said before, if it seems sentient, for the external appearance, behavior, etc., if it seems sentient, probably it is sentient. But if it has been built simply to seem sentient, if it's a fake, well, then probably it's not sentient. Okay, this is how can we use this abductive reasoning. Okay, and just to finish the presentation, how to demonstrate sentience. So I'm going to summarize some points and make new ones. How can we know if a particular object has the ability to feel? Okay, as we have said, the resemblance or similarity, the first point, I do feel. Then if I find another being with physically, behaviorally, other similarities than evolutionary next to me, I can use reason by analogy and then reach the conclusion that that being experience pain and pleasure like me. But this method, as we say, is unfair to beings very different from us because the Streetlight Effect. Okay, but we can use the best possible explanation, as we say, using abductive reasoning to get the best prediction with incomplete evidence as Sherlock Holmes. If it cries, and if it's not a hoax, if it has not been created to fake, then it's probably real suffering, for instance, no? And we have the third point is phenomenal puzzles. It's a method or a framework of methods suggested by a researcher from Qualia Research Institute that is called Andrés Gomez Emilson, and it's called A Solution to the Problem of Other Minds Using Mind Melding and Phenomenal Puzzles. And Andrés also created a video, very interesting and funny video, to understand this method proposed by him. And we also have another method, the fourth one, that is in my opinion, the theory we are in love with. If we are in love, as used to happen, if we are in love in a single theory of sentience, that I don't think is a good idea. But anyway, if we are in love in a single theory, on a single framework of understanding of reality, okay, if we firmly believe in that theory, let's apply that theory. If we are totally convinced that sentience is creating in certain way with natural neurons or with the function of something on the background that has some logical properties, or whatever is our theory of sentience, we can apply that theory to determine if a being is sentient or not. And I think this is all from my side. I know we have some time now for questions, but also if you have more questions, you can email me to this address, and you have also a link here to download to the slides if you want. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Manu. Very interesting presentation and a very relevant one, I think, both in terms of the world as it is right now and also the world that we may have in the future with the development of technology and the question whether we're able to actually create sentience and I will become sentient and so on. So I invite everybody to send questions here. I'm going to just start with one question of my own. So I think the question of the degree of sentience. You know, take insects, for example. There's a pretty good reason to believe that they have some sort of concept of the world, that they interact with the world, that there is something there, because insects they still do have central nerves. And I mean, there's even evidence for insects having emotions. There's some evidence that bees experience them. But you know, really, from an ethical perspective, the question is: are insects not only are they able to suffer, but how much can they suffer? You know, depending on how you think of setting priorities. I mean, you know, as you know, I think you agree with me that intense suffering and extreme suffering, in particular, has a whole different level of significance. So, it's not only with insects, is there something there, and can it perceive some sort of negative stimuli, but can they actually suffer the same way that organisms with large, more sophisticated brains can suffer? Just wondering if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, very interesting question. For me, it's very intuitive that less neurons suffer less, but this intuition is not big. I'm not completely sure about this intuition. It's not easy to explain. According to the theories of sentience could matter morally a lot. I have a slide. Let me check if I can. No. Well, I have a slide over here. Let me check if I can find it. About sentience of insects. Yeah. The main issue with insects is, I guess you are looking at the many million insects for every human. So even if the probability of the insects having high degrees of sentience, even if it's small, it's very relevant. Insects. and they could do very difficult things. Some of them even fly. So that argument of intelligence is particularly important in the case of insects, because they're very smart, the insects. And to make things worse, maybe they could feel the time in slow motion. In the slide, you have some links to several articles about those subjects, and be very sad if they feel the time in slow motion. Their deaths will be on slow motion, will be more painful. So this is a bad thing, yeah.
Actually, Manu, it's interesting. You're talking about the fact that even if there's a low probability that they can suffer intensely, that there's, because of the very large number, it makes the problem greater. It's interesting. This is, I mean, it's something I'm addressing in my book as well. The whole question of whether we can, to what extent expected value is a relevant kind of calculation to carry out. Because in a sense, we're dealing with some very basic question. What are the prerequisites for being able to suffer intensely? It's sort of like one basic question that we don't have the precise answer to. So yeah, just throwing in the thought that it's not even clear that expected value is necessarily the best way of thinking about it, but it is definitely potentially a relevant way of thinking about it. There was a very similar question from Vegan Option Canada, I guess from Soren. What animals are not sentient according to research? So he's asking, are clams sentient? And of course, this is a question that is relevant to, well, if bivalves like clams and oysters are not sentient, they could be, you know, if we really knew they were not sentient, we could consider them potentially even a food source, because they'd be similar to plants and be able to provide nutrients.
Exactly.
We have more trouble getting from plants. So the question is, what's your thought on, if you want to comment on that, what is your thought on whether bivalves are sentient, which, as they don't even have a central nervous system?
Yeah, of course, I will think about sponges that has no neurons, animals without neurons, because the classification of animals, plants, fungi, etc., of those ranks are somehow artificial. So I also consider the possibility of suffering in plants. We have a section in our website in Sentience Research about the possibility of suffering in plants, and some ideas about sending messages from one to others, etc. And that's all my thoughts. According to emergentism and functionalism, neurons are necessary to create sentience, and maybe we need a threshold of number of neurons, probably, according to this paradigm.
Actually, I have another question for you, Manu. So, and this regards not biological organisms, but AI. And you know, we've had conversations like this in the past, but I thought it would be interesting to have you comment on this. Do you think that the way computers are currently built, that they actually have the structure that is capable of generating consciousness? You know, even if we agree that, you know, we don't need carbon substrates, you know, we can create the architecture for sentience in theory. Do you think that computers, as they are currently being built, you know, I'm talking about classical digital computers, do you think they're actually capable, you know, using their logic gates of being sentient?
But probably Brian Tomasic will answer yes, and my answer is no. My answer is that in general, I don't think computers are built with the risk of sentience, because I'm not so much functionalist. But there is a type of computer that I think it has more risk, that is a computer in which we have life simulations. That is one thing I was doing some time ago. In fact, I started interesting in antispeciesism, starting from considering the possibility of suffering in machines. So if we believe that sentience is a product of evolution, and if we are simulating evolution in computers with genetic algorithms or evolutionary computation of any kind, and of course artificial neural networks, then we are creating something with the risk of having sentience. In that case, yes.
Yeah. There's a comment from Oscar, but I'm not going to read it. It's in the group chat. There's just a clarification about the perspective of animal ethics on whether the actual behavior, basically saying that it's not so much the behavior of a being that's relevant, but for sentience, but the actual being beyond a certain level of complexity. But there was more of a comment than a question. There's another question here from Soren and or Elisa, and this is about plant sentient, the possibility of plants being sentient. And so the question is it true that plants are not sentient, and as a proof they can't move around, let's say quickly, as a reaction to a threat? And what about carnivorous plants that can indeed move and even digest?
Yeah.
You know, we all know that people that resist vegan arguments like to come up with the oh, plants feel pain too, which I think generally sounds like a lot of nonsense. But are you willing to entertain the idea that plants could certain kinds of plants? Is there any possibility of them being sentient, and does the fact that they tend to be immobile, would you say that's in itself pretty good proof that they are not sentient?
Yeah, well, there is a theory or a paradigm that is called Panticism, and it's a good candidate for me. Panticism say that in some sense all the matter is sentient at some degree, and if we take this paradigm seriously, and a lot of researchers recently are moving to Panticism, I think we also consider that at least the plants are even rocks, but plants has some degree of sentience, and if they're carnivore plants, maybe with more reason.
Can I push back a little bit against that? Because even if one believes in panpsychism, that there's some sort of micro consciousness at the level of subatomic particles, let's say, that it's sort of like the building blocks of the universe and of consciousness. That doesn't, even if that is true, and I mean, well, personally, I'm skeptical about that. I think that it's really much more related to complexity. But even if we say it is true, I mean, what you've been presenting until now, you know, you've been basically saying that we have a good reason to believe, let's say, beyond a certain level of complexity and similarity to our behavior, it's more likely to be sentient, otherwise not. So wouldn't based on what you've been saying, wouldn't it be pretty unlikely for plants to be sentient based on that argument? You know, even if we admit panpsychism, you know, let's say at the basic sort of theoretical level.
Yeah, I think if I understood the question, yes, there are many paradigms and other more crazy hypotheses about reality and paradigms about sentience and consciousness, and I take them very seriously. So I think we have to consider these options, and also a criteria of reducing suffering. I mean, I have shown you a map of a lot of theories about sentience, and we don't really know which of them, which is true, but maybe we can put some resources to research some of them under the criteria that if they are true, their consequences in suffering will be very big. Not only because a lot of beings are suffering, but in the case we can do something about this suffering. But sounds very weird, those theories, and probably we have to go step by step.
There's a question here which is, I mean, it's a little bit similar to a question I asked earlier about insects and the degree of sentience, or rather a degree of ability to feel suffering, which is, as you define it, is what sentience is about. So I'll read the question here. Are there degrees of sentience or graduality in sentience? And if there is, how could we compare, quantify sentience, and what would it imply morally speaking? And I guess we can also talk about, well, I guess you can interpret the question how you like. I guess there's the aspect of intensity of suffering, and there's maybe a related question about whether there are gradations of consciousness, whether there are different degrees of awareness of the world. But
yeah, I think that is a fact that there are different degrees of sentience, because we experience it, for instance, with drugs. Even with anesthesia or another drugs, we can feel different levels and intensities, and we can modify our own machinery that is related to sentience. So I think it's a fact that there are different levels. What is not very clear is that other animal species has a different level than us, even considering that human brain is not the biggest brain in animal kingdom, and the ratio between the human brain and the weight of the body and again is not the bigger in animal kingdom. So if sentience, intensity of sentience will be a consequence of the number of neurons or the weight of the brain, other animals will be more sentient than we humans, and this is a possible, completely possible explanation that could be a surprise for some. But I think it's again linking to the previous one previous question. We are not completely sure that an insect has a very small degree of sentience. Maybe an insect has the same degree of sentience than us. Why not? It will be very sad, but.
There's a related question here from Elisa, and the question is, can some beings potentially be only capable of experiencing positive emotions, or only negative ones, or does sentience automatically imply the possibility of both?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. It seems that it's more efficient for evolution to create pain to escape from something, and to create pleasure to go to something. So pain is to escape and pleasure is to go. That pain and pleasure are two efficient motivate animals. But on the other hand, we can motivate only with pain and only with pleasure. And this is very interesting. That is modifying the biology that it has created by random, by evolution, God. But probably we know it has been created by random, by evolution. And from David Pearce's point of view, as it is a catastrophe, it's full of suffering, and we should modify, if we can properly, we should modify nature to avoid this and just motivate with gradients of bliss, with gradients of pleasure. So theoretically, I think it's possible. It's not easy, but theoretically it's possible to have a or only with pain. Up to now, to efficient to use both. That evolution is creating pain than pleasure. I think that there's more pain than pleasure in the universe. Yeah, related to entropy and other.
I was just thinking, actually, you know, to what extent the whole idea of bliss and how it can be effective. You know, imagine, you know, you've got a hot burner and you touch it by mistake, and well, you just feel a little bit less happy in that moment and think, oh, maybe I'll just. Maybe it's worth mentioning that there are people with mutations that don't experience pain, and in fact they don't experience.
Yeah, exactly.
They tend not to experience negative emotions either, and
they exist.
Some of them are a bit of a physical wreck because they hurt themselves all the time, but some of them are actually very happy. They're happy.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
I think we've only got like around 2 more minutes. Let me just say, I think we're basically just about out of. So I think thank you for the presentation, for answering all these questions. This fascinating topic.
Okay.
The next.
Thank you.
Presentation. The next presentation is going to be in 5 minutes, and it's from Laura Ludrassin. And the title of the talk is